There is a pain that almost no one talks about. It doesn't show on the face, it doesn't become a topic of conversation in the family, and it's not shared with friends. It's the pain of someone who wants to confess, but freezes. The person even enters the church, sits on the pew, prays, silently asks for forgiveness. But when they get close to the confessional, their heart races, their throat closes up, and their courage vanishes. It seems like something is holding their soul captive. And many people think this is a lack of faith, but it isn't. This silent pain is more common than you imagine. Children, young people, adults, and even the elderly go through it. People who love God, who want to do what is right, but carry a hidden weight. A weight that comes from shame, fear, and confusion. Fear of what the priest will think. Shame of saying aloud something that already hurts inside. Confusion about what can or cannot be said. And so, forgiveness is postponed. Father Pio warned that the enemy doesn't need to completely separate a person from God. It's enough to make them afraid of forgiveness. It's enough to plant the idea that this is too serious, this is too shameful, this has no solution. And thus, a silent prophecy is born that no one wants to hear. Many souls are not lost because they sinned, but because they were afraid to confess. Perhaps you're watching this video feeling exactly like this, wanting to break free but stuck, wanting to start over, but with a heavy heart. What if I told you that this fear doesn't come from God? What if I told you that confession isn't meant to humiliate, but to heal? Today, you'll understand why this pain exists and how it can end. Among all sins, there is one group that almost always weighs more heavily on people's hearts: sexual sins. This isn't because God hates this type of sin more, but because they affect something very intimate: the body, thoughts, and feelings. Unlike other sins, these don't just stay in the mind. They touch a person's identity. That's why shame grows. From a young age, many people learn that this shouldn't be talked about, that this is ugly, that this has to stay hidden. The problem is that when the time comes to confess, this learned silence turns into fear. The person thinks, how am I going to say this out loud? And the more they think about it, the harder it becomes. It's like trying to remove a thorn without looking at it. Father Pio said that the enemy uses this type of sin as a double trap. First, he leads the person to fall. Then he makes them believe they cannot get up. He whispers, this is too serious. God won't understand. The priest will judge you. And so, the sin that should be healed becomes a prison. Another reason is confusion. Many don't know if what they did was temptation or sin. They don't know what they need to say, what they can keep silent about, what is a detail and what is important. This lack of clarity increases fear. When a person doesn't understand, they freeze. But here's something that changes everything. Confession wasn't created to expose the person, but to liberate them. The priest isn't there to be shocked, but to absolve. He has already heard everything. He doesn't see scenes, he sees souls. And God isn't frightened by your truth. On the contrary, it is the truth spoken with humility that opens the door to forgiveness. If you understand why these sins are the hardest to confess, you've already taken the first step toward overcoming them. And the next step is learning to confess them the right way, without fear and without serious mistakes. The first serious mistake many people make in confession is trying to hide the weight of their sin by using generic words. The person enters the confessional, takes a deep breath and simply says, "Father, I have sinned against chastity." And to the one confessing, that seems sufficient, but it isn't. Not because the priest wants to know details, but because that phrase can mean many completely different things. Imagine a child saying, "I did something wrong." The listener immediately asks, "But what?" Because something wrong could be anything from telling a small lie to breaking something important. The same thing happens in confession. When you only say, "I sinned against chastity," the priest doesn't know what sin was committed. And if it's not clear, the confession isn't clear either. The Church teaches that sin needs to be identified, not hidden behind Pretty or vague words. Being too generic is like trying to clean a wound without showing where it is. The intention may be good, but the remedy doesn't reach the right place. Padre Pio warned that many souls left the confessional still carrying a burden because they hadn't been clear even with themselves. This doesn't mean telling stories, describing scenes, or going into detail. It simply means stating what happened directly and simply. For example, saying, "I had an extramarital affair," or "I saw indecent things," or "I sinned against myself." Few words, but true words. When the truth comes out, grace can work. Many people use generic phrases out of fear or shame. They think that by saying less, they will suffer less. But the opposite happens. The confession remains incomplete. The heart is not relieved, and the doubt persists. Was I really forgiven? God doesn't ask for perfect phrases. He asks for sincerity. When you stop being generic and start being clear, something changes. Inside, sin loses its power, fear diminishes, and confession begins to fulfill its purpose, not to accuse, but to liberate. If the first serious mistake is saying too little, the second is saying too much. Many people enter the confessional determined to tell everything, absolutely everything, for fear of hiding something important. And then they begin to describe scenes, thoughts, feelings, images, and even fantasies. But this is unnecessary and can become a serious mistake. Confession is not a film to be narrated. It is a remedy. And a remedy doesn't need a story. It needs precision. When someone starts going into detail, they end up hurting their own memory, rekindling temptations, and creating more weight on their heart. The Church has never taught that it is necessary to describe how the sin happened. On the contrary, it teaches that this should be avoided. Father Pio was very firm on this. He said that unnecessary details do not help the soul and do not increase forgiveness. Often they only fuel guilt, shame, and even new falls. God doesn't need to know how it was because He already knows. What He expects is the simple truth, spoken with humility. Think of it this way. If a child falls and gets hurt, they don't need to explain every step of the fall to be cared for. Just showing where it hurts is enough. It's the same in confession. Saying, "I had bad thoughts," "I saw indecent things," or "I sinned against myself," is sufficient. The priest understands. He doesn't need images, names, places, or lengthy explanations. Another problem with details is that the person starts to justify themselves. "I was sad. It was unintentional. It only happened once." But confession is not a defense tribunal. It is an encounter with mercy. The simpler you speak, the freer you become. Confessing well is neither hiding nor exaggerating. It's saying what's necessary and stopping. When you cut out unnecessary details, sin loses its power, the mind finds peace, and the heart opens to true forgiveness. This balance is essential to avoid making serious mistakes in confession. After understanding that speaking too little is a mistake, and that speaking too much is also a mistake, an important question arises. So what is the right way? And here is the balance point that almost no one teaches. Most people have never heard this clearly, so they live in fear of making a mistake in their confession. But the rule is simpler than it seems. The balance lies in saying what was done without saying how it was done. It may seem like a small thing, but it changes everything. When you say what you did, you acknowledge the truth. When you avoid the how, you protect your mind and your heart. This is the path the Church has always taught, and that many experienced priests follow. Father Pio explained this in a very practical way. He said that confession should be clear, brief, and sincere. Clear so that the sin is understood. Brief so as not to fuel the imagination. Sincere so that grace can act. It is not about hiding, but neither is it about narrating. Imagine someone saying, "Father, I saw indecent things." That's it. The priest understands there's no need to explain the website, the time, the image, or the thought. All of that adds nothing to forgiveness. On the contrary, it can bring back what the person wants to forget. The same applies to other sins. A simple, truthful, and direct sentence is enough. Many believe that if they don't explain everything, God won't forgive them. That's a lie. God doesn't measure forgiveness by the number of words, but by the sincerity of the heart. Sometimes fewer words mean more truth. When a person learns this balance, something changes within them. Confession ceases to be a burden and begins to be a relief. Fear diminishes, shame loses its power, and the heart feels peace. Confessing well is not about speaking beautifully or speaking excessively. It's about speaking what is necessary with humility and confidence. And this point of balance is one of the greatest keys to confessing without making serious mistakes. There's a mistake that changes everything in confession, and many people make it without realizing it, hiding aggravating factors. Sometimes a person even confesses the sin, but leaves out something important that changes the gravity of what was done, not out of malice, but out of fear, shame, or lack of guidance. And that's precisely where the danger lies. To understand this, think of it this way. Breaking a glass accidentally is not the same as breaking a glass on purpose. The act seems similar, but the intention changes everything. In sins, aggravating factors work the same way. They are not details to embellish the confession. They change the type of sin. Father Pio explained that when something changes the nature of sin, this needs to be said. For example, sinning alone is not the same as sinning with another person. It's not the same sinning while single as sinning by betraying a commitment. It's not the same sinning with someone of the same moral standing as sinning with someone who makes the sin more serious. These points don't need lengthy explanation, but they do need to be mentioned. Many people think, if I say this, it will get worse. But the truth is the opposite. When the aggravating factor is hidden, the confession remains incomplete. Not because God doesn't want to forgive, but because the truth hasn't been fully presented. It's like trying to fix something without showing where the real problem is. It's important to say, mentioning the aggravating circumstance doesn't mean going into detail. It's simply providing the necessary information. A simple sentence is enough. The priest understands. He doesn't need to know the context, the location, or the story. He only needs to understand the type of sin to guide and absolve correctly. When a person learns this, they even feel a sense of relief. The confession becomes clean, clear, and without doubt afterward. There's no longer that question in the heart, should I have said more? Peace comes when the truth is spoken simply, and avoiding hiding aggravating factors is an essential step in not making serious mistakes in confession and truly experiencing forgiveness. When the Church asks people to state the number of their sins, many panic. They think they'll have to do calculations, remember exact dates, or even write everything down on paper, but that's not true. The Church doesn't ask for math, it asks for sincerity. The quantity is important because it helps to understand the strength of the habit. It's not the same thing to make a mistake once through carelessness and to make a mistake many times out of habit, just as it's not the same to fall once and to fall every day. The quantity shows how often that sin has been repeated in the person's life, and this helps the priest to better guide them and indicate the right path to change. Father Pio explained that God doesn't expect a perfect memory. He expects an honest heart. Therefore, no one is obliged to remember exact numbers. When a person remembers, they say so. When they don't remember, they speak approximately. They might say a few times, many times, almost every day, or during this last month. That's enough. The problem begins when a person tries too hard to be perfect. They keep counting, calculating, going back in time, and end up more confused than before. This does not please God. Confession is not a school test. It is a healing encounter. God is not expecting a report, but the truth that is possible. It's also important to understand that stating the amount doesn't mean accusing yourself more. It simply means being clear. When the truth is told simply, the burden is lessened. The priest understands that nobody remembers everything. He won't demand more than you can give. When you understand this, confession becomes easier. You stop being afraid of making a mistake by forgetting a number. You say what you know in the way you can, and you trust. And that trust pleases God. The amount, when stated honestly and without neurosis, helps confession fulfill its role to liberate, guide, and bring peace to the heart. One of the greatest sufferings for those who try to live their faith sincerely is condemning themselves unnecessarily. Many people carry an enormous weight in their hearts, believing they have sinned when in reality they were only tempted. And here is a truth that changes everything. Temptation is not sin. Temptation is like a thought knocking at the door. It appears uninvited. It can arise suddenly without the person wanting it. This happens to everyone, even the saints. Padre Pio said that being tempted is not a sign of weakness, but of struggle. Sin only happens when a person opens the door, accepts the thought, and decides to stay with it. Imagine a child seeing a candy on the table. Thinking about the candy isn't wrong. The mistake only happens if they decide to take it secretly, even knowing they shouldn't. It's the same in spiritual life. A bad thought that appears isn't a sin. It becomes a sin when a person agrees with it and chooses to nurture it. Many believers suffer because they confuse these two things. They think, if it crossed my mind, then I sinned. That's not true. Sometimes a person struggles, prays, tries to push the thought away, but it persists. That's not sin. That's a fight, and God sees this. Effort with love. Padre Pio welcomed many people who were distressed because of this. He taught that temptation, when resisted, can even strengthen the soul. The problem is not the idea that arises, but the decision one makes afterward. When you understand this difference, something calms down inside. Guilt diminishes, fear disappears, and confession becomes simpler. You stop blaming yourself for things you didn't choose, and you learn to trust more in God's mercy, who knows your heart better than you do yourself. Knowing that temptation is not sin is one of the keys to living the faith without fear and without unnecessary condemnation. Many people enter the confessional thinking they need to tell their entire life story. They start by saying where they were, how they felt, what happened before, who said what, and before they know it, the confession has turned into a long conversation. But it's important to understand something fundamental. Confession is neither therapy nor a casual conversation. This doesn't mean the priest doesn't care about you. On the contrary, the Church teaches that confession has a very clear purpose: to acknowledge sin, receive forgiveness, and start anew. When a person turns confession into a conversation, they end up getting lost in the words and forgetting what's essential. Father Pio was very firm on this point. He taught that confession should be objective. This is not a narrative. It's not about telling the whole story, explaining every reason, or trying to justify the mistake. Phrases like, "I was sad," "it was a difficult day," or "someone influenced me" are not necessary at that moment. All of that can be discussed later, in another meeting called spiritual direction. Think of it this way. If someone goes to the doctor to get medicine, they don't need to tell their whole life story to receive a prescription. They just need to say where it hurts. It's the same with confession. You state your sins simply, clearly, and sincerely. The priest understands. He doesn't need the complete context to absolve you. When a person starts to justify themselves, something dangerous happens. They try to lessen their own responsibility. And confession is not the place to defend oneself, but to surrender to mercy. The more direct you are, the faster relief comes. Understanding that confession is not therapy helps a lot. Confession cleanses, therapy guides, conversation advises, Each thing has its time. When you learn to separate these things, confession becomes light, quick, and liberating, and the heart leaves in peace, without confusion and without fear. There's a simple detail that makes a big difference in confession and that almost no one talks about. Speaking quickly helps more than you think. This doesn't mean speaking disrespectfully or inattentively, but speaking frankly. The longer a person delays, the more the fear grows. The more they think, the more they freeze. Many people enter the confessional already decided to confess, but then they start to stall. They talk about other things, sigh, fall silent, change the subject. And during that time, their heart races, their shame increases, and their courage diminishes. The sin seems to grow simply because it hasn't been spoken yet. Father Pio taught that sin loses its power when it is expressed simply. He said that the enemy likes silence filled with fear. When a person speaks quickly and directly, that fear breaks. It's like ripping off a bandage all at once, and it hurts less than pulling it off slowly. Imagine a child who needs to confess something difficult. If they start beating around the bush, they get nervous and cry. But when they speak quickly, everything becomes easier. The same thing happens in confession. Saying the sin right away without preparing a speech brings immediate relief. Speaking quickly also avoids a common mistake, starting to justify oneself. When a person overthinks, they try to explain, soften, defend themselves. But confession doesn't need that. It needs simple truth. A direct sentence is worth more than a long speech. And there's something beautiful about that. The faster you speak, the faster you receive forgiveness. The priest understands, absolves, and guides you. Your heart calms down. Peace arrives. Not because you were perfect, but because you were sincere. When you learn to speak without fear and without delay, confession ceases to be a burden and becomes a rest. God doesn't expect heroic courage. He expects a humble heart that speaks the truth, and speaking quickly with confidence is one of the simplest paths to achieving this liberation. One of the biggest fears of those going to confession is imagining what the priest will think. Many people enter the confessional with a heavy heart, thinking that the priest will be shocked, judge them, or remember their sin afterward. This fear is so strong that for some, it is greater than the desire to receive forgiveness. But the reality is quite different from what the imagination creates. The priest doesn't see you as a walking sinner. He sees a person who wants to start over. For him, hearing confessions is part of his mission, just as caring for wounds is for a doctor. He's heard it all. Nothing you say will be new or surprising. Padre Pio said that the confessional is a place of healing, not condemnation. Another important thing, the priest doesn't keep sins in his head. He doesn't go around thinking about your confession, nor does he discuss it with anyone. There is absolute secrecy, which is taken very seriously. What is said there stays there. For the Church, breaking this secrecy is a very serious matter. This protects you completely. Many priests also understand human weaknesses because they are human. They know what it's like to struggle, fall, and get back up. That's why, when you speak sincerely, the priest doesn't feel contempt. He feels compassion. He's not there to measure your guilt, but to offer God's forgiveness. When you understand what the priest truly thinks, the fear begins to disappear. Confession becomes lighter. You realize you're not being examined, but welcomed. The priest is merely the instrument. God is the one who forgives, and God is not afraid of your truth. He already knows your heart. What he expects is that you trust him. When that trust is born, confession ceases to be a moment of tension and transforms into an encounter of peace. After hearing so much advice, many people still think, okay, but what do I say in the moment? And that's where a simple, short, and easy to remember method comes in. A method that can be used by anyone, in any confession, without fear of making a mistake. It fits into 3 sentences, just 3. The first sentence is, tell me what you did. No beating around the bush, no difficult words, just the truth. It's not about explaining how it happened or telling the story. Just state the sin clearly. A few words are enough. When you say, "What you did," the truth comes out and the real confession begins. The second sentence is, "Tell me if there was anything that changed the sin." Here's where the aggravating factors come in. If something makes the sin different or more serious, that needs to be mentioned. It's not a detail, it's necessary information, and you don't need to explain anything. A word or a short phrase is enough for the priest to understand. The third sentence is, state the quantity or frequency, however you remember it. It doesn't need to be an exact number. It could be a few times, many times, almost every day, or since your last confession. God doesn't demand a perfect memory. He asks for the sincerity that is possible. This method works because it avoids both extremes, neither hiding nor exaggerating. It protects your mind, organizes the confession, and brings peace afterward. Padre Pio taught that a simple confession is worth more than a long and confusing one. Imagine a child learning this. They can do it. An adult can do it too. There's no mystery, no fear, no trick, just truth, clarity, and humility. When you keep this method in your heart, confession ceases to be a burden. You go in knowing what to say and come out in peace. 3 sentences, 3 steps. A sure path to confess without making serious mistakes and truly experiencing God's forgiveness. After everything you've heard so far, there's one last point that can't be ignored. Don't delay forgiveness. Many people know what they need to do. They understand how to confess correctly, but they keep putting it off. They say tomorrow, next week, when I'm stronger. And meanwhile, their hearts remain heavy. Father Pio warned that the greatest danger is not falling, but remaining fallen out of fear. God's forgiveness is not a prize for those who never err. It is a gift for those who acknowledge their error and decide to return. Delaying confession does not hurt God. It hurts one's own soul, which remains trapped in guilt, restlessness, and fear. Perhaps you're hoping to feel less ashamed. Perhaps you're hoping to stop making mistakes first, but that almost never happens. The strength to change comes after forgiveness, not before. It's like trying to clean yourself before getting in the shower. It doesn't make sense. First comes the water, then comes the cleansing. God doesn't ask you to be perfect. He asks you to be sincere. He doesn't expect beautiful speeches or grand promises. He expects a humble heart that says, "I need you." And when that request is made, heaven opens. It doesn't matter how long you've been away. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen. It doesn't matter how heavy a burden you carry. Forgiveness is available now, today, right now. And every step taken toward confession is a step toward peace. If this video spoke to you, don't ignore this call. Don't delay any longer. Decide to start over. Write in the comments, "I will not delay forgiveness." Subscribe to the channel to continue learning to live the faith without fear, without guilt, and with hope. May God bless your decision. The first step has already begun here.
Hear the true prophetic message.